Hi everyone, Stepan here. Let's go d4 and hope my opponent plays the England Gambit. So I faced this guy before. BN when? Joined 3 years ago. Okay, I don't remember what we played, but I'm gonna go c4. Let's see what happens. Okay. Is it time for me to start playing the Catalan? I don't know, but I will try. Because this is a training game and I want to experiment, I'm gonna play everything from now on. I'm not gonna be playing what I'm most comfortable with. I'm going to play the lines in which I don't know the exact theory as well. An e6 player thinking about d5. Okay, I mean, we are going to go for the open Catalan if my opponent wants to go for that. Plays the closed Catalan, fine. Let's go knight f3. I think bishop e7 is more common. Yeah, now this is just a standard closed Catalan. I'm going to castle and my opponent is going to play for either b6 or e5. Now, what do I do if they take now? I don't know, but I'm just gonna go queen c2 to give myself the option to recapture on c4. Queen c2 is a move I want to play anyway. So, okay, this is my first Catalan in a training game. So I'm feeling happy already. It may not go well, but h6. Okay, wants to prevent bishop g5. I'm not sure I wanted to go bishop g5, to be honest. So now that h6 has been played, should I go b3 and play for knight e5? Or do I go knight c3 and on dc4, e4? Yeah, I like that better. I'm just gonna go knight c3, keep this bishop flexible for now. Bishop d2 is also a move. Okay, plays for e5. Plays for e5. So I can develop my bishop. Or I can play b3, or I can play rook d1, or I can play rook e1. I like rook d1. That's one of the purposes behind queen c2. We want to make d5 less effective because e5 less effective because d5 is hanging. So I like this. Now everything is lined up. e5 is, I think, unplayable. My opponent has to play either e5 or b6, bishop b7 at some point. So we will see. Okay, keeps playing for e5. I am somewhat interested in playing bishop f4. That may seem strange, but if I do go bishop f4, takes, knight h5, e3. Oh no, that's too messy. Let's go b3 and bishop b2. e5 I think is still unplayable because I take on d5, take on e5, and the bishop is loose. And also when I take on d5, knight b5 is a problem. Wait a minute, this seems awkward. This seems very awkward. I can go knight e5 now, simply preventing e5, winning the bishop pair. I can also go bishop b2, but then e5, d5, bishop e5, knight e5, rook e5, cd5, or sorry, bishop b2, e5, cd5, knight d5, e4. If cd5, then knight b5, bishop b8. I don't know if I should play knight e5 or simply bishop b2. Let's look at knight e5. Knight e5, if knight d7, then I could actually consider f4. If knight g6 I take, if bishop e5, then d5, knight d7, cd5, and then ed5, sorry, then cd5, I have bishop d5 or knight d5. Yeah, knight d5 seems very strong to me. Knight f8 is a very strange move, so I'm just going to be playing against e5. I don't want to allow black's main pawn break if I don't have to. This may have been a mistake, but it opens up my bishop. It prevents e5. So I like it. I mean, if black doesn't play e5, then what does black even do? I usually, I don't know if you've seen my videos, but I've had black here many times, not with knight f8, though. Okay, now bishop b2. I can also, I obviously don't want to take the bad Slav bishop, but this controls the b5 square. So bishop b2, rook c1 seems sensible. I don't have knight b5 anymore, but I don't think that's a big deal since c5 is unplayable. And what's the bishop doing on d7? I think my opponent has gone wrong. We're definitely out of book now. As I said, I have, luckily for me in my first Catalan, my opponent played the closed Catalan, which I've had with black hundreds of times, when you count blitz games and online games and training games and tournament games. Okay, c5 still loses a pawn, but my queen is kind of loose. So let's say rook ac1, c5, cd5, ed5, knight d5, knight d5, bishop d5, cd4, rook d4, bishop b4, doesn't work. Okay, yeah, this is completely fine. c5 just loses a pawn, it's unplayable. And if my opponent takes on c4 first, then on c5 I have d5. No, I don't, my knight isn't defended, but I can throw in knight d7 likely, and then d5. Whoa! What's going on here? This is... What is this? I mean, if I go c5, my opponent's bishop is dead and buried for the rest of the game. So c5, bishop e5, de5. I don't know where the knight should go. Knight g4? But then I go f4 and the knight's trapped. So c5. I definitely don't want to allow my opponent to have piece activity unless I have to. c5, bishop e5, de5, knight h7? That seems awful. How do you ever activate your bishop? No, I'm just going c5. I want to play against this bishop. Every other line where I take either pawn, this bishop becomes active. So no, I'm not gonna do that. This is a dead piece. My opponent doesn't take on e5. Okay, this is very, very weird. Weird, to say the least. Now I just have a perfectly closed position where I need to somehow activate my pieces along the f-file. So I'm thinking rooks on the f-file, f4, f5 at some point. I definitely don't want to go b4. I'm not afraid of b4 by black because of knight a4. I can also play... Wait a minute, rook f1 makes sense. I need to transfer my bishop to c1, so I need to get rid of my rooks. I need to just move my rooks so that I have bishop c1. I think that's priority number one. Why am I down on the clock? How is my opponent playing so quickly and playing such strange moves? Okay, knight g6 is not playable. f6 is not playable due to knight g6. Do I just prevent knight g5 with f4? Am I afraid of knight g5? I don't think so. Let's just stick to my original plan of bringing my bishop to c1. I don't really care about knight g6 or knight g5 or f6. Maybe I should be afraid of f6. Maybe I go f4. Because f6, knight g6, queen g6, e5 could be problematic. And then if I have a pawn on the f-file, I'm on f7. Queen f7 check. I like f4. Does my opponent play g5? I can play e3. Okay, I'm playing f4. This is kind of risky, but again, I'm playing against e5. I don't want to allow f6, e5, if I can help it. Look at this bishop. This is my only goal, is to keep this bishop buried on d7. Okay, now knight g6. And if my opponent takes and goes e5, then my queen is on f7. And my rook is on f7. I actually have rook f7 winning immediately. Wow. Okay, queen g6. Now if e5 takes. Okay. Throws in knight f8. Now we can play against e5 once again. So queen h5, e5, fe5, fe5, queen f7 check. Or even rook f7. I feel like this has to be correct. I mean, not that I have any other squares for the queen, but e5, my rook is opening up. Okay, prevents that. I need my bishop on c1. So my opponent wants to go e5. My opponent wants to go e5. I feel like e4 could be correct now. e4, d4, knight e4, e5. Where's that knight going? Either e4 or rook e1. Or rook d1. No, rook d1 is bad. Rook e1, e5, fe5, fe5, d5, bishop e5, and my knight is pinned to the bishop. So e4 first. Or even rook c2, e5. I'm going to have to play both rook c2 and e4. This is about to blow open. I want to activate my bishop, because when I go e4, if my opponent doesn't take, I'm going e5, again shutting in the bishop. If my opponent does take, my bishop is on e5, preventing e5. Then I have sufficient defense. So once again, e4 plays against e5. And of course, if my opponent plays e5 now, I can take, bishop takes, check, I think winning. Definitely, if e5 isn't played, I'm playing e5 myself. Oh, there's bishop e8. I didn't see bishop e8. That is my fault. So now I have to defend my d4 pawn. So if d4, knight e4, the pawn is defended. If queen e2, do I go queen e2? Queen e2 preparing rook e1, so that on ed5 the rook hangs. That seems interesting. So queen e2, d4, knight e4 seems promising. My opponent's going to go bishop g6. But there isn't much I can do. I have to move my queen. Oh, I also have to speed up. Why does my opponent still have 14 minutes? How can you make such quick decisions in a position like this? Oh, I don't care about that. So now rook e1 lines up with winning the rook. So now I'm threatening ed. And after cd, knight d or bishop d. My opponent needs to play rook c7, yeah. Sees everything straight away. Very good play by my opponent. So e5 is no longer a realistic option. So can I triple up my pieces on the e-file and go rook f3? No, rook f3 fails to bishop h5. Huh. I no longer want to allow b4. So I'm playing b4. I need my knight to guard e4. I also want to see what my opponent does. Okay, this opens up the bishop. a4 seems like a good idea. a4 takes, knight takes, threatens knight b6. a4 takes, queen a6. Rook a7, queen d3. Okay, I'm playing a4. My opponent still isn't doing anything active, so let's break open the queen side, or if my opponent doesn't react, I may be able to create a passed c-pawn. Okay, rook a7, now I definitely shut things down. I wish to keep that side of the board closed. Bishop h5 is very annoying. It's very unfortunate that I don't have rook f3. So I may have to play h3, but that weakens g3 and f4. Okay. This doesn't do that much. So takes, e takes. I feel like I should move my queen away from the e file. So queen f2. I just want to get rid of this constant pressure if I take that my queen is hanging. I want to take on d5 because my opponent has to recapture with a pawn. Now I also have f5. Again playing against the bishop. It's amazing how this weird, very bad, very passive setup worked for my opponent. I still don't feel like I have a major advantage. Okay, this is passive. I definitely keep the bishop shut in, but then my bishop is shut in as well. So let's take here. E takes is forced. How do I get my knight into e5? That's the only question. I need my knight on d3. So I'm looking at knight d1, f2, d3, e5. And I also want to prevent bishop h5. So can we consider queen f3? My opponent has queen e8. There is queen e8 on queen f3. Still, I'm playing bishop f3 so that my opponent never has bishop h5. I have to make one of those two moves at some point. I also have very interesting sacrifices on d5. If my opponent, for example, plays rook a8, blundering, then I could consider taking. If the queen is, let's say, on e8, that's a lot of hypotheticals, but it could happen. I'm again playing against the bishop. Now I have a bad bishop. How did my opponent achieve this? I may just play rook e5 at some point. I want my knight on f2. So queen g2 will be my plan. And my opponent will try to exchange the bishop with queen e8. That's the thing I'm afraid of. Queen e8 exchanging bishops with bishop h5. But that might lead to knight d5 sacrifices. Two connected passed pawns in the center and my bishop opens up. Taking on d5 actually liberates my bishop on b2, so it may not be a bad idea to give up my knight in order to liberate my bishop on b2. Okay, wants to go knight f6. and into e4. Wow, my opponent is playing excellent moves. I didn't even see that idea. So I'm gonna have to do something. So queen g2, knight f6. Whether they go for bishop h5 or knight e4, I don't know. But I still need my knight on d3. My opponent's playing very good moves. There really isn't much I can do against that. I need to try to do this. Get my knight into e5. I know that your knight is coming into e4. Give up the file or not? I think I have to give up the file. Yeah, I'm giving up the file. I'm playing for knight f2, knight d3. Once I get my knight into e5, and I don't think there's a way to stop that, because on rook e3 I have bishop c1. No, I don't have bishop c1. What am I saying? I am once again getting outplayed. And my opponent is destroying me on clock time. And he has beaten me before. $1900 bullet rating. Very good play for a 1900 bullet player. I'm not insinuating anything. I'm just saying he must be strong strategically and maybe bad tactically, or much worse tactically, just like me. Because he's playing very well. Luckily for me, he played bishop h5 and not knight e4 straight, or sorry, rook e3. I was most afraid of rook e3, but now I get to misplace this knight at least, and it doesn't give my opponent time for rook e3. Because on rook e3, knight e5, rook b3, I have queen d2. This knight cannot be taken because I win the pawn on f5. For now, at least. And I also have queen h3 coming up. Why would you go g6 to defend f5? Isn't that risky? Okay, let's improve the queen. Now I can go for g4. Now it's time to stop thinking about this like it was a closed position. It's about to blow open. I have g4. Perhaps I could have tried h3, g4, but I want to play g4 with my queen on h3. Not yet. But maybe king h1. No, king h1 runs into knight e4, knight f2 check. So let's improve the bishop first. Covering d2. I want my bishop on e3 to cover all the key squares. Why am I down 5 minutes on the clock? Bishop c1 also attacks h6, so if on g4 the pawn is overtaken, no, I'm actually gonna play queen g2, h3, g4. I need more. This isn't enough. Luckily for me, the pawn on c6 is a big issue, so my opponent solves that problem. Okay, let's prepare h3, g4. I don't think my opponent ever plays g5, because f5 is a big problem. Takes. Interesting. Okay, well, let's take back. Do I play g4 immediately? I think I do. g4, what does my opponent do? Queen f8 wins. Queen f7 wins. Is g4 just winning? It could be. I don't know. I mean, my opponent has to take. Now I have a passed pawn and my opponent doesn't. My bishop is also wide open. I have queen h3 or queen f4. The rook is attacked. Okay, now I go queen f4, threatening the pawn on h6 and preventing rook f7. Ooh, there is knight g5. Ooh, that's scary. Knight g5 is a great move. g5. Okay, now there is no knight g5 anymore. So I'm thinking queen f5, but is there something better? No, I need to keep controlling the f-file. There are no knight jumps, my bishop controls everything. What's the endgame like if rook f7? That's the real question. I don't think my pawns ever hang. Do I even have a way to avoid the queen trade? I don't think so. I guess I have to take. At least the knight's restricted. If I could get my bishop to e1 somehow, that would be tremendous. How to get my bishop to e1? I don't think I can, so unless the h pawn moves. I know that g4 is coming, but there isn't much I can do. My pawns are never hanging, that's good news. Do I want to exchange a pair of pawns? I don't know. I guess I just have to wait. For g4 to come. I don't think I'm ever winning this. I don't think there's a way for me to win. My opponent could win. But that would require extremely good technique and me blundering. Yeah, I'm just gonna fix this pawn on a dark square, and when my opponent plays g6, sorry, g3, I'll have access to this pawn later on. I had to prevent h3 check. Now the king has no entry squares. These two are covered, and I don't think I can lose. All right. Now knight f2 is a problem because it could win this pawn. So let's go bishop e3 and follow that up with king f3. Yeah, now I feel it's just a dead draw. Knights are very tricky. My bishop is useless in this endgame. If any of these pawns were on a dark square, then we'd be talking. Or these two, because I'd have sacrifices. But in this case, I only have the one passed pawn, and it's well protected, because if the king marches in, there's always knight f6 after e6. Now my opponent's going to have to be slightly careful about allowing king g4. So they are going to have to watch out for that. Also, knight f2 is no longer scary, because if the king is on g4, because I go king takes h4, and on g2 I take the knight. Yeah, so I think my position is extremely safe. Although knight versus bishop endgames are notoriously difficult to figure out, and there could be knight sacrifices at the correct moment. Yeah, okay, I'm definitely not taking the knight, so that's not an option. So let's just wait. My opponent isn't coming in because on king e4 you lose the knight. I obviously don't have a way to make progress because I don't. If my opponent moves the knight back, I'm playing king f3. Wait, perhaps I could consider taking. No, it's the king and pawn endgame is a dead draw. I'm not losing it, but I could consider taking, because my king has to stay within the square of the g3 pawn, and my opponent's king has to stay within the square of the e5 pawn. So I could take and just agree to a draw. King e4 loses immediately to e6. Wait, am I losing to knight e6? I may be losing to knight e6. I don't have king f2. I'm losing to knight e6. I had to take that knight, Because the king's coming into e4. Oh no. Knight e6 is incredibly winning. Because it completely dominates my bishop. Yeah, knight e6. Why not knight e6? Knight e6 was just winning. Am I crazy? Okay, let me show you why. So instead of this, you go knight e6. What the hell am I supposed to do? Let's assume I want to defend my pawn. I have two ways, bishop b2 and bishop e3. Bishop e3 loses to king e4. That's it. Bishop b2 loses to king e4, not because of taking, but because I'm in Zugzwang. So let's say I do this, then here, then this, then here, then this, then here. I'm just going to turn on the engine here so that you guys can see that I'm hopefully right. Okay, so let's turn on the engine. Okay, so bishop c1, knight e6. Yeah, -7. Okay, at least I saw it, but my opponent didn't. Why didn't he play knight e6? Okay, so here I had to take that knight. I have to take that knight. I saw that the king and pawn endgame is a draw because my king needs to stay within this square, his king needs to stay within this square, and it's just a dead draw. On bishop c1, knight e6, I just resign. There is absolutely nothing I can do. Okay, I feel sorry for my opponent. He should have won this endgame. I was so confident that it was an easy draw that I actually blundered. And I told you it's notoriously hard to hold on in these endgames. Okay, bishop d6. I don't know that move, but it's playable. I don't play it myself. Castles, castles. Queen c2 is fine. h6 is not a move. I mean, makes sense. h6 doesn't really do much. Knight c3. Rook d1 is fine. I'm guessing all of this is fine. Yeah, knight f8 is strange. No games with knight f8. Now let's see, the engine plays bishop b2 or e4 or e3. I went knight e5, which is okay. Bishop d7. I should have gone e4 straight away. I went bishop b2, which is fine. Rook c8, e4 once again, but rook ac1 is close. Okay, I wonder... c5 is the best move. Okay, or e3. c5, bishop c7. Rook f1 is fine. f4, yeah, I should have gone e4 straight away, but f4 is okay. I should have declined the trade. Why did I go for the trade? I should have kept controlling e5. I'm losing? What? f5 traps the queen? No, it doesn't. Okay. The engine changed its mind there. e4 is good. Good. b4 is a mistake. I should have gone e5. Okay, a5 is a mistake. I should have kept my options opened on the queen side. This is a mistake I keep making. So the next time I have a chance to close down the position, I'll think carefully. Queen f2. Instead, I should have gone e5 again. f5 takes is a mistake. The engine keeps playing e5, and in this position I can see why. But how do I win? If I go e5, how am I supposed to win? Okay. Taking is a blunder, giving up the file. And I'm sure my opponent should have gone rook e3 here. It's good, but bishop h5 is better. Okay, takes is -3 on queen h5. There is rook e2. Queen h5, rook e2. Oh my god. Okay, all of this is just equal. And I'm guessing I haven't blundered until bishop c1. Yeah, I blundered it twice. 96. This is just awful endgame play. I mean, why did I see 96 only after I've played bishop c1 and blundered twice? I should have lost this game. I deserved to lose this game. There's such an easy move for my opponent here, 96. Okay, I got away with one. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.